Um, so if you remember, maybe a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Abraham, and we talked about that Abraham got a promise, and it's important to keep having a promise in our lives. And without a promise, it's going to be hard to continue. And we also talked about, a couple of days ago, we talked about, the spiritual way, the spiritual path, and that in the story of Abraham, we see three starting: Terah, Abraham, and Lot. And only Abraham was the one that was able to finish to the end and also fulfill God's will and gain all the blessings that God wanted to bestow on him. Although Lot did kind of continue with Abraham, but he lost everything at the end. So today we want to continue with our father Abraham and see something else that's really nice. When he first started the journey in Genesis chapter 12, the famous calling of Abraham: get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And then he gave him a promise. I will bless you, I will make you a blessing, I will make you a great nation, and so on. And it said that, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Of course, at the age of 75, it wasn't really easy to do what Abraham did at the time, because he's getting old, and we talked about his father. That was one of the problems that he had, that he was really old, and that was symbolic of the spiritual aging. That sometimes I say, I had enough, I want to relax, I don't want to work anymore. But Abraham did, and it says when he was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, then Abraham took Sarai his wife and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. What happened right after they arrived at Canaan? Now they arrived at the land that God wanted to give Abraham. That's the promised land. Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem as far as Terbinth of Moreh, and the Canaanites were in the land. Then in the next couple of verses, from verse 7 to verse 9, we will see something very interesting in the life of Abraham. It started, when he got to Canaan, and it never left him. It said that then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Remember, in the promise or in the calling, he said, to a land that I will show you. And until he got to Canaan, he didn't know what the promised land is. But now that he got to Canaan, God appeared to him and said to him, to your descendants I will give this land. So now God is giving him a confirmation, of this calling, of this promise, that this is the land, and this is the promise that I'm giving you, is that you and your descendants will have this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord. Notice here we have a promise from God, and we have an altar that Abraham built. So there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. So Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Notice here in verses 7 and 8, we see three things. And those three things kept recurring in the life of Abraham. The first one is the promise. Abraham got many promises from God and many confirmations and many times that God appeared to him to encourage him. And we talked about this before, that this is really important. Many times we lose our faith. Many times we go through a hardship and we need encouragement, and we need someone to, remind us about something. And in fact, when we are, attending a meeting at church, for example, or listening to a sermon or any such thing, this is actually the purpose of that, is to remind us. It's not that we are going to listen to something, for example, that every time we have never listened to before, but it's to remind us of the things we know and we need to continue and endure in. The second thing is that he built an altar to the Lord. you notice that Abraham, wherever he went, he built an altar to the Lord. And this is such a beautiful thing in the life of Abraham. And it's a beautiful thing if we can do it in our lives too. Although we are not going to build a stone altar like Abraham did everywhere he went. But we can build an altar, meaning that, what's an altar? An altar is a place where someone offers a sacrifice to God. So that means, our prayers and praises are sacrifices. So if everywhere I go, I establish a relationship with God, I pray to God, I talk with God, this is the altar I'm building. And it's very beautiful when we have such memories in our lives. And for example, everywhere I go, I remember that in this place I had communion with God. I had an interaction with God. This is something really beautiful. Versus that I may leave a bad memory somewhere. And this is something that, is going to be heavy on my heart, whenever I remember that place. But if everywhere I go, I connect with God and interact with Him, this is going to leave a beautiful memory. And then the last thing is, the third and last thing we're talking about today, is that he pitched his tent. And, Abraham was rich. In fact, you can see here that when he headed to Canaan with Lot, he had a lot of servants and a lot of sheep and cattle and all these things, a lot of possessions. When he got to live in the land of Canaan, he got to be very rich. And when he went to Egypt and came back, and then went to the land of the Philistines with Abimelech the king, he got to be even richer, and he became very, very wealthy. But something never left him: his tent. And this is strange. A wealthy person like Abraham is supposed to build a house, and especially that actually this is the promised land. God told him, I will give you this land as an inheritance to you and to your descendants. So in fact, most people in his situation would actually build like a mansion, or maybe build the whole city after his name, and say, this is, since God promised me this land, so I'm going to build this place and my descendants are going to live here forever. But no, he actually did not do that. He always had his tent. Because he's a stranger. The tent belongs to a stranger, someone that doesn't occupy the land, doesn't live forever in that land. But a house is a permanent settlement. A tent he can pitch anywhere. He can take it with him and pitch it anywhere. And that's what St. Paul explains to us in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 11, when he talks about the men of faith, that they did not look for the earthly cities. They looked for the heavenly Jerusalem, the city that had foundations. So we see in the life of Abraham 3 things that accompanied him: a promise from God, a tent that he never left and never thought about building a house, and an altar that he built everywhere he went to God. So I hope that we can, think about this and try to learn this from our father Abraham, how to remind ourselves of God's promises, how to always read the Bible and get something encouraging from God every day, how to have a communication with God everywhere we go, and connect with God everywhere we go, and also remember that we are always strangers in this place. يعني أقول بالعربي بسرعة التأمل بتاع النهاردة، إن في حياة إبراهيم كان في 3 حاجات لازموه دايما. أول لما وصل كنعان بيقول إن هو ربنا ظهر له واداله وعد، قال له لنسلك أعطي هذه الأرض. طبعا هو ربنا كان بيأكد له هنا إن أرض كنعان دي هي الأرض اللي هو هيديها له، لأن هو لما خرج ربنا قال له تعالى وأنا هوريك الأرض اللي هتروحها، ما كانش قال له الأرض دي فين. فهنا اداله الوعد. وهتلاقوا إن في كل موقف صعب في حياة إبراهيم ربنا ظهر له واداله وعد. وفي كل موقف كمان بعد كل امتحان، لو كملنا كده تأملات في حياة إبراهيم هتلاقوا إن بعد كل امتحان ربنا امتحن إبراهيم بيه في وعد اداهوله. هنشوف الكلام ده في المرات الجاية. لكن الاستجابة بتاعت إبراهيم كانت في شكل إيه بقى؟ إن هو ربنا ده صاحبه. أنتوا عارفين إن إبراهيم ده اتقال عليه إن هو يعني خليل الله، صديق ربنا، يعني واحد كده عنده علاقة حميمة مع ربنا. فكان كل ما يروح حتة يبني مسبح، والمسبح ده في كذا مرة يعني لما يقول بنى إبراهيم مسبح ودعا هناك باسم الله. يعني المسبح ده مكان الإنسان بيصلي فيه لربنا، ممكن يكون بيقدم ذبيحة، ممكن يكون بيصلي، لكن احنا طبعا في العهد الجديد بنقول ان احنا بنقدم ذبايح تسبيح، يعني بنقدم ذبيحة الصلاة، بنقدم يعني كل الخدمات اللي بنعملها، او كل اي خدمة بقدمها لربنا واي صلاة بقدمها لربنا دي ذبيحة. فحلو خالص ان انا في كل مكان اروحه اخد ربنا معايا واكلم ربنا واسيب ذكرى حلوة في المكان ده. يعني بتبقى جميلة قوي مثلا لما نروح مكان، يعني عادة ممكن المكان ده مثلا يبقى دير أو كنيسة، وافتكر كده ذكرى حلوة في المكان ده، إن أنا في المكان ده اتقابلت مع ربنا. تخيلوا بقى لو أغلب الأماكن اللي بروحها أو كل الأماكن اللي بروحها سبت فيها نفس الذكرى دي، تبقى حاجة جميلة قوي إن أنا كل ما أشوف مكان افتكر ان في المكان ده انا خدت الوعد ده مثلا من ربنا، او في المكان ده انا ليا ذكرى معينه مع ربنا. تبقى حاجه جميله قوي لو كل مكان بنروحه نبني فيه مسبح. الحاجه الثالثه ان في كل مكان ابراهيم راحه كان بياخد معاه الخيمه بتاعته، عمره ما بنى بيت، برغم ان هو ابراهيم كان ربنا وعده بالارض دي وقال له دي الارض اللي انا هديها لك انت واولادك ميراث، لكن هو عمره ما قال خلاص بقى انا هستل، هستقر بقى هنا وابني بيت وابني بقى مدينه وتبقى باسمي يعني انتوا عارفين ان اكشلي اغلب الناس زمان يعني المدن كانت بتتسمى باسم الشخص اللي سكن فيها في الاول. لكن ابراهيم ما عملش كده. وما عملش كده زي ما القديس بولس بيقول في سفر العبرانيين، لان هو كان ينظر للمدينه التي لها الاساسات، ما كانش باصص على الدنيا. يعني جميل قوي ابونا ابراهيم في الحكايه دي. يعني يمكن لو اي واحد فينا خد الفرصه اللي هو خدها، الغنى اللي كان عنده والميراث اللي ربنا اداهوله، كان ممكن بسهوله جدا يفكر ازاي بقى يكبر ويعمل لنفسه اسم ويعمل لنفسه شهره ويعمل لنفسه بقى بلد وعيلته تبقى كبيره. لكن ابراهيم ما فكرش في الحكايه دي. وهي دي يعني دي القاعدة، إن اللي بيجري ورا حاجة ما بيلاقيهاش، واللي ما بيفكرش في حاجة ربنا بيديها له. فإبراهيم ما كانش بيفكر كده، فربنا اداله كل الحاجات دي، اداله الاسم واداله المجد واداله قال له نسلك يكون زي نجوم السماء وزي رمل البحر. فثلاث حاجات في حياة إبراهيم يا ريت نفتكرهم نفكر فيهم في وقت الخلوة بتاعنا، إن إبراهيم كان في كل مكان عنده وعد، عنده مسبح، وعنده خيمة. لإلهنا المجد دائما.